Every day, mobile fitness apps and wearable technology generate an ocean of human behavioral data, tracking our every move. That information is no longer confined to your personal health dashboard. Institutional investors are actively using these daily wellness metrics to back municipal green bonds, calculate healthcare reserves, and issue corporate carbon credits. But there is a structural flaw built into this new financial ecosystem. The vast majority of this underlying data is entirely self-reported. It relies on the honor system, without any institutional-grade verification. Security researchers call this the Authentication Gap. It is the blind spot that exists when a digital identity is completely separated from the physical presence of a user performing a specific activity with specific equipment. When you anchor billions of dollars in carbon registries and healthcare reserves to an honor system tracking app, widespread financial fraud becomes a mathematical certainty. Passive tracking apps like Strava achieved massive user adoption because they removed all the friction. You simply tap a button on your phone and the GPS records your ride. At a macro level, this passive data has real utility. City planners regularly use aggregated user heat maps to identify high-volume cycling corridors and plan new infrastructure projects. This chart shows the structural difference between tracking methods. As you can see on the left, mobile GPS data is incredibly easy to spoof, fabricate, or manipulate. You can literally just put your phone in a moving car, and the app will record it as a world-class cycling sprint. A manipulated GPS file is harmless if you are just trying to impress your friends on a social network. But if you submit that exact same file to a carbon registry or a bond underwriter to claim a financial credit, it is legally classified as fraud. Because of this vulnerability, actuaries and regulators, like the SEC, are beginning to systematically reject unverified behavioral data. They cannot accept risk models built on easily fabricated inputs. Relying on a social network's data to justify institutional finance is a structural failure. Capital markets do not operate on trust. They require absolute cryptographic proof. The Dandy Horse engineered the VIDAT framework as a multi-layer verification system designed specifically to close the authentication gap. This diagram illustrates the standard tracking flow. A user opens a smartphone app, makes a single tap, and generates a vulnerable data output. VIDAT replaces this with a multi-layer binding protocol. The first layer requires a biometric facial and fingerprint scan at session initiation. This proves that the specific, registered human is actually present. The second layer establishes physical hardware binding. The user must scan NFC and RFID tags. RFID tags are radio frequency identification markers physically affixed to the bicycle and helmet, proving the specific equipment is in use. The system then issues active mid-ride proofs. These include randomized prompts and mechanical rotation signatures from the wheel that mathematically prove the bike is being pedaled by a human, not sitting in the back of a moving vehicle. The final output of this complex process is an immutable, blockchain-secured audit trail. It is a data package engineered to satisfy rigorous legal and actuarial standards. VIDAT abandons user convenience to achieve something required by institutions: audit-grade truth. To understand why this matters, look at the math through an actuary's eyes. In healthcare reserving, statistical uncertainty is penalized through tied-up capital. This chart breaks down an insurer's capital allocation. That large section on the right is the margin for adverse deviation, or MAD. MAD is the capital an insurer must hold in reserve because they cannot trust self-reported wellness data to predict claims. The mathematical trigger happens when an actuary can substitute their generalized industry tables with VIDAT's verified longitudinal cycling data. ASOP 25 is the actuarial standard that allows a more predictive dataset to be used once it achieves full credibility. As the uncertainty drops, the required margin for adverse deviation shrinks. This process legally moves millions of dollars from a restricted reserve back into the insurer's active surplus. There is a strict precondition for this release. The behavioral data must pass an independent third-party certification by a licensed credentialing body before a single dollar of capital can move. Verified behavioral data is a financial tool that shifts capital from restricted reserves into an insurer's active surplus. This same verified data dictates the economics of city infrastructure. Across the United States, 25 municipalities are currently operating under legally codified decarbonization mandates targeting 2030 and 2040. Cities like Denver, Portland, and Boston offer high-value e-bike vouchers. But handing out thousands of dollars per resident creates a distinct financial predicament. Committing public funds upfront requires prospective verification of intended use. The city needs to prove the bike is actually being used for commuting, forcing city planners to abandon passive apps in favor of hardware-bound verification. This graph illustrates the bond market arithmetic behind that data. When cities issue green bonds underwritten with audit-grade mode shift data rather than survey estimates, the bonds command a tighter spread, shown here as a 25 to 50 basis point compression. A basis point is equal to 1/100th of 1%. On a $500 million infrastructure bond, that spread compression translates into $1 to $2.5 million in annual debt service savings over the entire life of the bond. For a city finance director, the math is straightforward. The cost of implementing this verification infrastructure pays for itself entirely within the first coupon cycle of the bond. Average consumers will reject a platform that requires daily biometric scans and physical equipment checks to track a ride. This creates the friction paradox. The exact rigor that makes the data institutionally valuable makes it practically impossible to scale as a free consumer application. The solution is the employer-mediated model. This framework completely reframes the individual user, moving them from a retail consumer into a compensated data source. An insurer grants a premium reduction to the employer based on verified data. The employer uses those savings to pay the employee a monthly stipend to perform the verification protocol. This revenue share splits the actuarial dividend between the institution and the commuting employee. User friction is only a barrier when it goes uncompensated. When effort is properly monetized, friction becomes the protective moat that guarantees the financial asset's value. Organizations choose platforms based on their tolerance for friction versus their need for financialization. Passive tools for heat maps belong in the bottom left quadrant, low friction, low defensibility. Enterprise CFOs and administrators require the top right quadrant, high defensibility, which necessitates higher friction. Operating in that top right quadrant carries a heavy administrative burden. Organizations must navigate HIPAA compliance and manage business associate agreements. HIPAA is a federal law that requires the protection and confidential handling of health information. But the payoff for adopting that burden is absolute. It grants the ability to transform a standard employee commute from an unverified anecdote into a legally defensible, reserve-reducing financial asset. Institutional wellness programs are shifting from self-reported anecdotes to cryptographically proven financial assets. For the sophisticated institution, the behavioral honor system is no longer a viable option.